Okay, welcome everyone to the start of week 4 of the legislative session. I'm not sure where we are on the Oregon Trail adventure that we are conducting, but we might be fording a river or we might have lost an axle.
Oh, no, that was last week.
Last week?
We fixed the axle.
We fixed the axle. Okay. I'll have to remember what other options there are on the Oregon Trail. Maybe we have to go and hunt for food because we didn't pack enough. Okay. Well, welcome to the start of week 4. It's always good to be with city peeps on a Monday. The first order of business we have is always to adopt the minutes. So hopefully you have again spent your weekend reading and absorbing the February 3rd minutes, and someone is prepared to make a motion to approve the minutes. I feel like I heard that from the Mill Creek section. There we go. Mike Winder, thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Burton, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Great, our minutes are approved. As just a standing reminder, if you want to speak to an issue, please remember to say your name and your city. We have a great number of people that are attending online, and that helps them keep track of who it is that is offering those comments. With that, we have a really packed agenda. The staff is updating Slido options as we speak. So we're going to turn things over to Justin to get started.
All right. Ooh, even though it doesn't show public, can I look at stuff or is that going to mess me up? Okay, great. All right. Welcome, everybody. So a quick couple of updates, couple of housekeeping things. Next Monday is President's Day. Washington and Lincoln's Day, for those of you who want to call it that. So do not come to LPC next Monday because we aren't having it. I know. I know you're broken up about that, council member. So next Monday, no LPC, but we will have LPC next Tuesday. And I know that throws off some of your schedules. Tuesday gets weird, but LPC will not be Monday next week. It will be next Tuesday. We do have a packed agenda, so I'm going to do a couple of really, you know how we get to the end of the LPC often, we're like, here's 20 things to think about that we didn't have time to talk about. I'm going to tell you what we're not going to have time to talk about right now really quickly. One, there are several ambulance bills out there, including HB 301, SB 215, 391, 209, lots of ambulance bills. We are not going to have time to talk about them all today. Here's when we're going to talk about them. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we're going to have a briefing on ambulance bills. Normally that is the time when we have our morning briefing, but because there are no committees tomorrow afternoon, which is great news, we're going to have an ambulance briefing. So if you would like to be a part of the ambulance briefing tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, shoot me an email. My email, jlee@ulct.org, jlee@ulct.org, and I will send you the invite to be a part of the ambulance briefing tomorrow morning. So that's ambulances. There's one thing we won't have time to talk about today. A few other quick things we're not going to have time to talk about today, but we're going to talk about quickly. One, the gravel pit bill, HB 355. We are waiting for substitute. You don't need to leave, Dave. It's okay. We're waiting on substitute language on that one. There's nothing to talk about yet because we know what is currently in the bill is not what is going to be in the next iteration of the bill, or at least there'll be some substantial changes. So if you're really excited to talk about gravel, stay tuned. We will talk about that one. We're just waiting for the next iteration of that bill to come out. Hopefully next Tuesday. Other quick things we're going to talk about: stormwater bill, SB 220, construction modifications. This is a continuation of the stormwater bill from last year. If you remember, HB 507 that passed last year is currently law, and we'll do some quick updates on that one later. But if you want to talk about stormwater bill, feel free to reach out. But 220 is out there. 507 is already law, and this is an effort to make that one much better. Local regulation of business entities, SB 179. We're working on language to see some changes there. And SB 211, first-class cities lose land use authority over school districts. This one may be getting resolved, but if you're a first-class city, stay tuned. We may need to reach back out to you on this one. So there's some rapid-fire ones. Watch the LPC nightly email tonight. We do a recap video in there. The recap video may talk about some of these things more in depth. We'll cover some other things that are in there. So there is our rapid fire. And with that, who's up next, or who's going to go first? Are you up? I don't know. Do we have Representative Peterson here out in the hall? Jared, do we have him yet? Okay, then we'll kick over to Cam to start talking housing and land use.
All right, greetings, everybody. The good news is we are at LPC number 4 out of 6. So technically we are over halfway there if you just count LPCs and if you count weekends. In terms of the amount of work, we're nowhere near halfway there. Before I start into housing and land use, Jared, you just tell me when Representative Peterson's ready. Ready now? Giddy up. It's been a pleasure, everyone. Jared, I'll let you introduce Representative Peterson. I'll let you drive to where it needs to go.
I'll let Carson drive to where it needs to go. Okay, so we're just gonna start. Thank you, Representative Peterson, for coming, and just wanted to briefly introduce again HB 58. This is, and let me just come back here. This is the new qualifications that we'll be applying for building officials, the 6 years of experience at any of those fields. Actively licensed as a combination inspector, and then either has 40 hours of management training and established by the division or rule, and is a certified building official. So we had some questions last LPC. Let me just say this, and Representative Peterson, you can come and answer questions here, but the point is to get qualified individuals to be looking at safety concerns. And if the inspector is saying one thing, is there someone else that is in that supervisory role to be able to say, well, you know what, the industry actually treats this and reads this and interprets this law differently than how you're applying it. And so that's kind of there's only I think a handful of cities that there are some issues with or training and that needs to happen. And so Representative Peterson, if you could come and take some questions, any questions that anybody has related to Representative Peterson's bill. That was easy. Norm. Oh, we got.
This is Dirk Burton. I'm the mayor of West Jordan. Of all the trades, which one is the best?
Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question, and I'm able to answer this with 100% surety that it's the electrical trade.
Okay, I agree. So I think we can support this.
All right, thank you.
Let's go, Norman.
So I was in a meeting Norm Beagley, Santaquin City. I don't know that this applies strictly to us, but I was in a meeting last week where we were asked the question, will this affect timeliness? Will it affect the ability to continue to inspect? I believe that especially for rural communities, this is going to be onerous and going to be very, very difficult for them to meet. So I think that just needs to be taken into consideration. Again, not necessarily for us. I think we'll be fine. But I think for the rural side, I think it's going to be very, very hard.
Do you want to speak to your survey or?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did, I think 2 LPCs ago, is we sent out a survey asking for who this would affect as far as the qualifications are concerned. And most responses were from smaller cities. And as you can see there, 43% said that they met all 3 requirements to be a building official. 81% had 2 of the 3, and 100% met at least one of those requirements. And so you can see that the lowest there is the 55% are certified building officials. There is that other option, though, of receiving 40 hours of management training. So that would increase. When asked various jurisdictions, and you can tell me if this is your understanding as well. When asked, UABO, the Utah Association of Building Officials, as well as UCOLA folks, most of them said, well, if it's in a rural city, many of them have county building officials that take care of and that already meet these qualifications. And so it won't be as big of a challenge as I initially thought, given this survey and then representation from UABO and UCOLA. I don't know.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I served as the building official for Box Elder County for almost 5 years, and I'm sympathetic to what we need to do for rural Utah. I know in Box Elder County, those smaller communities that didn't either have the budget to pay for somebody of this qualification or just didn't have the budget to pay for an inspector at all. As the county, we covered those inspections, and it's my understanding that for the most part in those rural counties with the smaller cities, that's how it's functioning. But if we have cities that this is going to adversely affect, then I'd like to know about that and see what we can do to address those concerns, because I am sympathetic to that. But I'm also sympathetic. The building official's role in a community is to interpret the code and to make, based on application and petitions, to interpret the building code. And it can't be somebody that, in my opinion, it shouldn't be your planner. It shouldn't be somebody with no construction experience who has the ability to understand and to correctly interpret construction issues. And so that's why we put the 6 years of experience there. I'm willing to work with that a little bit, I think, but I think we need to have some level of qualification in this role. So that's kind of why we put that there. Any other questions?
Holly McKinney from Fairfield. It will definitely impact my town. It's small, but we are experiencing growth, but we can't afford to pay a building inspector, nor do we have the need for a building inspector right now, but it will definitely impact our town.
So if you don't have an inspector, how will this affect your town?
We pay an inspector, but if I have to have a building official on full-time, it will affect. our town.
You don't have to have one on full-time. You just have to have a building official. A lot of cities contract with the building official, but you are required by code to have a building official, even if he's not your full-time building official, he or she. They are required. Every city should have a building official by state law.
We do have a building official. It's me. I'm the mayor as well. But
Okay, well,
you have to wear several hats, but right now to pay somebody to come in and do our building official stuff, it would be very hard.
Any other questions? Okay. Hey, thank
All
you.
right, thank
Thanks
you.
for
Oh.
coming.
One thing that I know is a concern as well is the time frame for these people to get to meet these requirements. So we're working to try to give more time. This bill was originally going to go into effect May 4th. But Jared wanted to go to next May and I was hoping for October. So I think we've got a substitute that will make it effective January 1st to try to give cities time to figure out a way to, if this is going to affect you, figure out a way to make it happen. So
That's great.
thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for working with us on this. And I think that, for those, and we will follow up with those cities, smaller cities that will be affected by this and wouldn't be, it would be difficult for them to comply within by January. So we'll get a hold of that and then let you know. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, folks. Now we just got to get it back in order. Yeah, Carson, you want to just get back in order for us? Okay. we'll jump back up to the update on the various housing bills. And last week, we presented some of these to you for the first time, and we've made a lot of progress on them since that meeting and really over the last few months. Okay, perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay. Just as quick context, though, based on a lot of the questions we got both during LPC last week and subsequent emails and texts, I thought it was important to give you an update on what the league board has discussed over the last really year and a half now on housing. And there are several league board members who are here. And is it fair to say, league board members, that every board meeting we're talking about housing policy in some form or fashion? Yes. So there were several board members up front who both said yes. I'm going to reference the state housing audit from a year and a half ago, just as an example. Okay. So state housing audit came out in November of 2023. Since then, the league board has discussed this 3 times formally in November 23, January 24, and September 24, plus other related things in other board meetings. And we use Slido for board meetings like we do with LPC. And this was the framework that the league board created for us to utilize. So opposed to state mandates when it comes to zoning, opposed to production targets that cities can't control, and opposed to penalties on cities. But a willingness to look at collaborative strategic planning, look at LUDMA, and look at data or improving the data collection around actual and potential housing units. In fact, you can see the Slido results here. On a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being the worst, you can see that was almost universal that every board member was concerned about that recommendation from the housing audit, which was the legislative state mandate, right? And then as you go through the Slido results, these were the areas where the board said, yeah, we want to work together on the statewide strategic plan and amendments to LUDMA, and then getting the right data to help inform these conversations. So, for example, we had Steve Waldrop here a couple of weeks ago to unveil the state housing plan. And at our request, they've given us as an organization until almost the end of March to get feedback from as many cities and towns as possible. So if you haven't already given us input, please prioritize this at City Hall to give us input on phase 1, because once phase 1 wraps up in the spring, we'll start to pivot to phase 2, and we want to make sure we hear from as many cities and towns as possible. So the deadline, it's a soft deadline, but the deadline is March 19th for you to get feedback to us so that we can aggregate it and assemble it and pull out the key themes in anticipation of the phase 2 meetings, which will start in April. So here's just the quick list of what we've fought off so far, some of which has appeared in bill form, some of which has not. This is just in the last year in the housing and land use space. A couple of these were just last week, but I'll come back to that in a second. So when it comes to policy preemption or changes to municipal revenues or really restrictive land use processes, we've been able to really push back on the bad ideas. But we've also tried to come to the table to solve problems. And we've tried to come to the table and to find those areas where we can have consensus to make a difference. So one example of what we fought off, I want to thank Mayor Walker, who was up here with me on Friday and testified against both House Bill 88 and House Bill 90. These are just a couple of the headlines from over the weekend where Mayor Walker was quoted. So thank you, Mayor, for your testimony. And thank you to those of you who responded to the action alert. These are the 7 legislators who voted with us in that committee. Please thank them. If you have a relationship with them, if they represent your city, please make sure you follow up with them and thank them. Our primary argument on Friday was not that the league is against ADUs or that the league is against small lots. It was that we were concerned about the state preemption of local zoning, and we wanted a partnership, not preemption. And that message resonated with these 7 members of the committee who were there and voted no on both of those bills. Then as a reminder, your year-round feedback matters because our negotiations are happening year-round. So we use the LPC obviously on the monthly basis to gather feedback. We're going to share one of the data results from last week's meeting. So we asked you how many of you were concerned about the language in SB 165. That's the language that would require voter approval of a revenue bond for municipal broadband. That's what SB 165 would do. And so we asked how many of you were concerned about that precedent of requiring voter approval for the first time for revenue bond. And 71% of you said you were very concerned. and an additional 16% of you said you were somewhat concerned. Well, that's incredibly valuable information to Mayor Walker as league president, to the league officers and league board. The next day, we were sharing this information up here at the Capitol. Now, this will be a fight. This is not a wishy-washy, everybody's on all sides of things. This is a big deal to our membership, and so this is a high priority for us. So when it comes to the housing and land use pieces, there are a lot of bills that we are opposed to, and I mentioned House Bill 88 and House Bill 90 as two of those. Then there are other bills that we've been working on throughout the year, whether that's trying to result in new product that is owner occupied, that's affordable, that results in sustainable infrastructure, quality of life, or making tweaks to last year's tools on the financing side, or looking for areas where we can solve problems on the process side, or laying the groundwork for that state housing plan. Then there are other bills that have popped up that we're still evaluating and kind of how they fit into the overall picture. With that as background, I'm going to turn it over to Jared to talk through the updates to House Bill 368. But are there any questions just about kind of the context of how we got to this point where we are as of February 10th? Okay. Then before I do that, I just want to thank everybody who sent emails and texts or spoke up at LPC, like Councilmember Baskin, Councilmember Watts Baskin, you pointed out one of the vesting issues in the bill last week, and that specific language is coming out because it didn't match the problem we were trying to solve. And that's part of the fun when you send language to Ledge Research. Sometimes you don't always get the language back from Ledge Research that meets the objective you were trying to solve. So perfect example, like you giving us that technical feedback is very helpful. And Jared, to his eternal credit, has spent countless hours over the last week going line by line through the bill and kind of reconciling all the feedback you've given with the feedback we've gotten from the other stakeholders, and now has an update on House Bill 368.
Yeah, thank you, Cam. I wanted to first talk a little bit about how we ended up at where we ended up with HB 368. And with every single negotiation that we make during the session, all of these questions are asked with every single one of those topics. Does it make good policy and improve processes? Would our members likely support or oppose? Does it sustain or limit our duties to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens? Protect local legislative authority? Is the alternative worse than the current proposal? Are the complaints valid? Are they widespread? Is the impact widespread? And can we isolate the issue by certain language? If we were a firm no, what would the perception be to legislators? And do we lose political capital? And do we want to spend that political capital in this specific area? Or do we have bigger fish to fry? And so really, all issues are vetted through these questions. What does it mean if we were to accept this? So when we talk about HB 368, all of these issues are included within HB 368. Last week, we showed a picture of meat and potatoes. After diving further into it, it looked more like spaghetti. Very little of what was in there was what was given. And so it looked more like spaghetti. But having gone through it, made some amendments. We're still working on it, still negotiating. But these are all of the aspects of 368. So what I'd like to do is just go through a couple of them, specifically land use amendment noticing requirements, bonding, as well as plan review. And if you have any questions, please just feel free to stop me and we can go through that. So when we were looking at land use noticing, what this does is it changes our noticing from having to notify multiple zoning districts and multiple, basically the whole city in certain situations, to update our land use code when it's a simple text amendment, or when it's a very, you're changing the word, or a state law comes out and you actually need to change your land use code. Well, if it affects certain areas, that noticing has to go to a large area of your city. So what this does is we said, okay, this is good policy, and it improves processes. It impacts every single city. It's not just an isolated problem, but it impacts everybody. If we were to push for better noticing, would it reduce? I don't know that it's hyperbole to say that combined together with all the people in the rooms over the last months, it's 1,000+ hours for just HB 368, negotiating back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So this is something that we wanted to push forward. A lot of times we think legislation being a good choice and a bad choice, that we should either push this or fight against it. And a lot of times, as a city attorney, I can say that was a little bit my viewpoint. It was, you know what, this isn't good for our city, so let's push back on it, full steam ahead. But I can tell you this, that up at the legislature, things are different. It's not always a good and a bad choice. It is, well, do we want to get rolled on this, or do we want to choose our own destiny? Is it a worse, or is it just a bad choice? And can we get it to a neutral or a good? Where is our capital? So that's what I wanted to make clear, that yes, there are things that will stretch us. Yes, there are things that we don't like in this bill. But overall, looking at those key questions, these are things that, generally speaking, we can adapt to. And there's been a lot of times. So this is one example. We have a friendly legislator, as I would call, up here, that said, you know what? I'm tired of the developers and the cities saying, well, we need more time and you guys are taking too long. You know what? We're going to cut into plan review. You're going to have 4 days to do screening of that application, and then you get 10 days. So whereas now, currently in law, we have 14 days to do the plan review, and then it doesn't say, it's ambiguous as to how long we have to determine whether it's a complete building permit application. What that does is it says, okay, well, according to developers, we can take as long as we want to determine whether it's a complete application. So we can take a month and then turn it around and say, you know what, it's an incomplete application. You need to resubmit. Instead of doing that, we said, okay, instead of going for this alternative, we said, well, we still want that 14-day plan review period. And you know what? We will identify that we have 3 days to screen it for completeness. When asking other folks that are in this industry, they said, well, it takes about 15 minutes to determine whether an application is complete. So we have 3 days. Now, granted, there are a lot of applications that come in on 1 day. I get that. But determining whether that application is complete or not doesn't take very long. So let me just show this. This is where the bill currently sits and has been agreed to. We have a 3-day screening period to determine whether the application is complete. Then the 14-day period starts. Now that is if we haven't given notice that their application is incomplete. If we give them notice within those 3 days, that time period stops. And they can't go forward. And they've got to give us those documents. But if we don't give them notification within those 3 days, that 14-day period immediately starts. And we've got to do our plan review with the documents that we currently have, because we were given 3 days to determine whether the application was complete. And now the 14-day period plan review starts. If there are times throughout that plan review that we say, okay, you haven't filled this out completely, we don't know this information, and it's in those items that we can require for plan review, if it's within that last period, which is 5 days before the end of the 14 days, and we still need documents, if they give us those documents after those last 5 days begins, so if they give it to us on day 11, any time prior to when they give us that document within those 5 days is added on to the end. So if they give it to us on day 14, we've got another 5 days to review whatever document that they've given us. So this was the compromise after many, many negotiations of, instead of going to this, where we only have 14 days, 4 days for screening and 10 days for plan review, we felt like this one was a much better option. And it still provides that we don't have to approve a plan unless we have all of the documents. So this continues forward. Unless we have all the documents, we do not have to approve that application. Building permit application. Building permit
relay with the
application.
mic. Mark Christensen, Saratoga Springs. This is a complex issue, and I just wanted to point out, this is exclusively for building permits, not your total planning application, because it does make a big difference in whether this time frame can be met. And so I just wanted to make sure we had that clarity for everyone in the room. Thank you.
This is not a subdivision review. This is a building permit application. So I'm taking too long here on this, but these are the things that we looked at. The alternatives are worse. Most municipalities are not affected by the quicker timelines because they're already completing those within those timelines easily. The long timelines were isolated events. In other words, if cities went longer, they were few and far between certain cities. The political capital to fight this would have been significant because of certain legislators having a lot of influence to be able to pass certain bills that would be more like this. So let me go over the bonding bill. There's a lot to digest with the bonding bill. It splits up the bonding into different infrastructure categories: water, sewer, storm drain, different infrastructure categories within your city. It also, and I'll get to a little bit more about that a little bit later, it limits the time to determine warranty work from 45 days after warranty work request to 15 days for first through fourth class and 30 days for fifth and towns. Now, there are exceptions, and those exceptions are winter weather conditions. The number of requests substantially exceeds the normal scope of inspection. In other words, if you are drowning as a city because you have so many requests to determine whether the infrastructure is complete or whether it passes warranty, that is one of the exceptions. If the applicant filed 2 or more requests within 30-day period or processing an unusually large number of requests. It also accounts for the scope of a certain project. In other words, if you've got a request for warranty work, but there is a lot going on with that warranty work, that's one of the exceptions. Now, is this squishy language? Yes, it is. Let's not abuse it. Because this is we don't want to be back here again next year talking about this bonding. Inspections more than 3 times gives additional 15 days for each subsequent time. I'm guessing that many of you have had inspectors go out and look and inspect and say, you are not ready. And then they go back again and say, you failed again and you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And a third time. And so after that third time, third inspection, 2 re-inspections, if they still haven't done what they're supposed to, we can add on those another 15 days and another 15 days and another 15 days. We don't have to go back immediately when that's requested. If the city rejects the infrastructure, they must give the list within 15 days telling telling the developer a comprehensive list and a specific list of the things that they need to change. If there's been some problem with cities not giving that list and having developers go, well, then what are we supposed to change? We want to change it. We don't know what you want. And so the resolution here was, okay, if there is a city doing that, they have to give a 5-day notice. And if they don't respond within those 5 days for that specific list, we have to give back 20% of the applicant's security back to the applicant. It was and started at the full bond and all of the fees. So this is what we were able to come back to and draw it back to and negotiate down to this 20%. There is also a 90-10. Many of you already do this and have a completion of 90-10, returning 90% after the infrastructure is complete and returning the 10% after the warranty work is approved. Some I've seen do 50-50. This would require you to change that to 90-10. But many of you already do this. Cash bonds would be put into an interest-bearing account, need to be put into an interest-bearing account. We recognize that this may lead your city to make a decision to not accept cash bonds. They know that as well. So, but coming down to this, one of the considerations is that third bullet point down. Interest-bearing account gives us more of an administrative burden to determine what is the interest on that cash bond and what is the principal. And to give back that interest to them, the perception of legislators, though, if we were to say, no, we get to keep this interest and we're not going to separate, we get to keep this interest on the cash that you gave us, that's not our money to begin with. That's their money. That the perception would be that we're profiting off of their own cash. That wouldn't go too far up at the Capitol. And the political capital would be considerable that we would need to use to get there. So those are some of the considerations that we use, we look at in every single situation with this land use bill. It better be a nice question.
It is nice. I'm going to ask the best attorney I can think of this question. On the cash bond, yeah.
Just pass the mic.
Oh, my name is Dirk Burton. I'm the mayor of West Jordan. Thank you. On the cash bond is really a non-issue, but in my mind, they chose to make the cash bond. They're the ones giving that cash to the city to satisfy the bond. They could have done it in so many different ways. They're the ones that decide to make that. So when then the city gets that, we get to do additional work with that cash bond, where some of the other bonds, we would just set it and put it in a file drawer and then give it back to them afterwards. So there is more expensive there. I'm not going to die over this one, but I think it's kind of silly that they want that money for there when they could have done it, stuck that in their own bank account and did it bonded a different way. But
understood.
Yeah, Norm Beagley, Santaquin City, a couple of things here. If we can't require a bond for construction, which we don't, we allow them to do what's at risk, which is what you're preferring to do down here. But now they're going to go create millions of dollars of infrastructure and not have a warranty or a construction bond on it. That seems rather troublesome to me as far as the city is concerned. So the previous slide that you had said that we can't require a warranty bond on it until such time as it's completed. So you're going to have a gap there, because most of the at-risk that we do, or that developers choose to do, is they'll go put everything in that nature.
I don't think it says that. And maybe I misspoke here, but what it's saying is when it is complete, that's when you would have to release that within each specific infrastructure category. And then after the warranty period expires, that's when we would release that warranty portion. Every single city, according to code, has to provide at least 3 ways, 2 or 3 ways, of providing a financial security. And one of those can be cash, one of them can be escrow, one of them can be letter of credit, or a surety bond. In fact, one of the considerations that we had that we were able to fight off is requiring all cities to require surety bonds. None of us, well, maybe a few, none of us like surety bonds. It's extremely hard to collect when there's an issue. So that was one of the things that we pushed and said, no, that's off the table. In fact, I think that was the response that we received back from all of you is, no, that's a deal killer. And we said, okay, that's a deal killer. And we got somewhere. And so that's where we're at with those different questions and considerations. Any other questions? That wasn't a question. I'm not taking that as a question mark. Cam.
Thank you, Jared. As you can see, our staff recommendation is we're working towards support based on all the amendments we've been working on over the last little while. So the substitute's not out yet because it's not finished yet. In fact, we've got a meeting later today to talk through additional changes to try to get a substitute ready, and then we'll bring back the substitute, but we are working toward support on this one. Is there another question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the sticky wicket here, but Lisa Baskin, North Salt Lake. In the bill, the substitute bill that's on the screen that you can pull up, in lines 3264 through lines 3274. Please look at that, because what it's doing is we're saying cities are doing ministerial acts when they do certain things with land use ordinances. And I'm afraid we're giving too much away in terms of local legislative authority.
Is that in the noticing section?
No, it's in the
'Cause we-
bill altogether.
Sure, but I think that term showed up in the noticing section. Go ahead.
It's at lines 3264 through 3274.
What's the issue though?
It basically saying that a proposed land use ordinance change is ministerial in nature if for the only purpose it's doing 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it includes municipal land use updates or adopting a non-substantive declarative text amendment. That one might be okay. Defining an affected area proposed for annexation. Those, to me, are legislative decisions. Those are policy decisions. And what we're doing is we're waiving that control. And it worries me that this is even in the bill. Why are we defining? Normally, the courts define when something is ministerial.
Well, that was the language that we used because when you've got a text amendment, in other words, if you have one word that you're changing that doesn't change the policy.
I don't quibble with that one, but you've got 4 or 5 criteria here that are a problem.
And we can go over that.
And a recodification of a land use code is a legislative act.
Right.
Anyway,
And this is in
I
the noticing-
appreciate,
this
with
is
all
in the
due
noticing
respect,
section, right?
with all due respect, I know you've worked hard on this,
Yeah.
but look at that.
So, and just my quick response is this doesn't change your authority. It's simply what noticing is required. And those actions would have a different noticing threshold. That's the concept there. So we do need to move on to next bills, but yeah, Jared, I'll have you follow up there. Okay. Quick update on House Bill 37. This is Representative Dunnigan's bill. Last week, we said position pending because we were still working out with him. Now we've changed our staff recommendation to work to support because he's agreed to our proposals and we've sent those to Ledge Research. So basically what Representative Dunnigan's House Bill 37 will look like going forward is an optional chosen by the city density bonus for ownership and affordability. And if a city does that, then you basically get extra credit toward MIHP. So that's piece one and then piece two and piece three around additional data reporting and the regional plans, it's going to pivot toward setting the stage for what's in the housing plan so that we don't have some data required by the housing plan and some data required by statute. They'll be aligned, but it won't go into as many specifics in statute. It'll just say we want this sort of data collection, which is something again, we've been asking for years, to have better data collection about what's entitled, where it is, et cetera. Paul? So the question about the regional plan. So we're trying to just take all the references to the regional plans out of the bill. Because to Representative Dunnigan's credit, what he was trying to do here was to get away from state mandated outcomes and say, let's have each city in the state be part of a region. As we were going back and forth, like there's some value to that, but we collectively, organizationally aren't ready to commit to what that looks like. And in the state housing plan, one of the key principles therein is to take the regional and holistic approach, but it's just at that level, that's the principle, with a lot of work still to come. So we didn't want this bill to get in front of the housing plan, and then we can continue talking about what regional and holistic means over the next few months. Our primary emphasis around regional holistic is that should be focused on infrastructure capacity, both existing and future, so that the dialogue around housing is not just housing, it's infrastructure and what can be accommodated where. Okay, House Bill 360, nothing has changed yet. But we anticipate language either coming into 360 or SB 181. These missing two pieces. One, the Legacy City Pilot Program. So Mayor Nadolski's behind me over there. We had a meeting with Ogden City and Steve Waldrop and Dave Damshin last week. This is something our board prioritized a few months ago, and we've just been trying to figure out how to make it work. But the concept here is that the state would fund a pilot program for established neighborhoods where a city could purchase, using city funds, could purchase rental units to convert them to owner occupied units, and the state would provide a matching fund for it. Ogden City's had a program since 1991 that does it, and the whole idea is, can we take that to scale in legacy cities across the state? The first step is to demonstrate proof of concept, which is why we've referred to it as a pilot program. But we made some really good progress last week. So we think the pilot will get some legs and get some state money attached to it. So then in future years, that can expand to other legacy areas. So that language may go in 360, it may go in 181. And then the condo program, there's been a lot of discussion about how to facilitate the development of condos. And there's still some language that we're working through there. Okay, SB 181, this is Senator Fillmore's bill. We got a lot of questions after last week's LPC. So I wanted to just walk through what's in the bill and what's not in the bill. So as of right now, the language that's public is not consensus language, okay? The language in the bill right now is not consensus language. And you can see why, because the current bill as public says can't require garages in a development agreement, and then it limits ability to regulate where garages and parking go. What we've been working toward has been to eliminate that bottom half, that you can't require garages, can't require in a development agreement, limit where the garage or parking goes on the lot because of ingress egress issues. And a prior version had a maximum parking minimum per type of unit. And I'm confident all of those things will come off the table. So then that leaves conversation around covered parking, uncovered parking, having that as the standard in state law. Then city can still require off-street parking. And then it's up to each city what those parking minimums are. So that would be unaffected. The unobstructed, we've been working on that definition because that came up at LPC. In fact, it was Harriman who brought this up at LPC a few months ago. If you're going to count them as two, they've got to be unobstructed. So we've been trying to figure that definition out. And then the garage piece is with city can't require the garage if the unit is deed restricted and affordable for at least 5 years, but the city could, that's the starting point. So it's trying to get to that middle ground of, okay, Cameron City's not requiring the garage. That should bring down the price, but the benefit gets to the home buyer directly. So let's go, Paul. And then as Paul's answering that.
I don't want to interrupt if you're
No.
still explaining.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Paul Larson, Brigham City. Key question I haven't been able to figure out yet is, does this apply to single-family detached houses? Does it apply to townhouses? Does it apply
Excellent
to
question.
multifamily?
There's a
And
Slido question
specific-
coming right
okay.
now on that.
And specifically our issue, we just adopted language regarding townhouses, and they have their own unique issues. And the tandem parking, will we still have the ability, if that's adopted and applies to townhouses, to say, okay, you're going to have an additional 20-foot setback to accommodate the tandem parking?
Right. Excellent questions all the way around. We have a couple of Slido questions I'm going to get to in 30 seconds that gets to the townhome, single-family distinction. So I'm glad you brought that up. But I wanted to just share with you your Slido results in January that have helped inform our negotiations over the last little while. Because we asked the question of LPC, is it a high priority to fight this type of state standard in the code? And only 8% of you told us it was a high priority to fight the 9x18, 10x20 in code. And only 10% of you told us it was a high priority to oppose tandem equals 2. So based on that feedback, that's when we said, okay, we're willing to negotiate in those pieces because you've told us in other areas, these other things are more important. So we have other Slido results that say, very concerned to similar to what Paul was just saying around the parking minimums. And we do not want a state standard around the parking minimums because a neighborhood in Layton, neighborhood in Kaysville, you're going to need more flexibility on that planning side. And so we drew the line there based on these Slido results. And we said, okay, we're willing to talk about these pieces because that's what you told us in January. I mentioned the land use survey. This is what Carson did in December. And we reached out to 35, we had 35 cities, the emphasis high growth areas. You can see 82% of cities actually have that 10x20 covered as your current definition for single family. So that's another key data point here as we think about the position on this bill. Paul?
Just one additional piece of color for this. In Brigham City, although we're within UTA, I would not say we have even bare bones transit. And so some of these requirements seem to assume that you've got robust transit that allows residents to use transit instead of cars. In our situation, people rely on cars. And in townhouses, for example, 2-3 bedroom townhouses, those are almost always occupied by families that have 2 or more cars.
No, good point, Paul. And you mentioned the 2 or more cars. That's why we drew the line at the parking minimums. So that from a planning perspective, you could say in Brigham City, we need to plan for this many units or this many parking stalls in order to accommodate the need and the demand. Because again, that's what the Slido results told us. That was the higher priority than defining a definition that a lot of cities already had in code. The other thing is part of the reason this has been such an emphasis in the Commission on Housing Affordability is the smaller garage can result in a smaller house. And if the city requires the bigger garage, that in turn often leads to a bigger house. So it's going the opposite direction of affordability. So we wanted to take that argument away. So like, we're not the ones requiring the bigger houses. Okay, so I mentioned that Paul was setting up Slido questions. Cassidy, I see questions coming in, so let me know if I need to address any of those before my voice disappears on us here. So Paul asked the question about townhomes, and he's right because the discussion had primarily focused on single family and 2-family residences. In the discussion with the other stakeholders, they wanted that same definition applied to townhomes, but then they said, we're fine with the city requiring additional off-street parking. So then the question becomes, I'm going to ask 2 questions, Slido questions. There's this one, and then I'm going to ask a similar question, but with a different size for townhomes compared to single family, different size garage, okay? So this question is, how do you feel about that 9x18, 10x20 standard applying to townhomes, so long as the city can still require sufficient off-street parking? So I'll leave that open. There we go. I'll leave this open for a moment because we have 190 online in addition to everybody in the room. So we'll leave this open. What it's adjust. So right now, the majority of the cities that we surveyed are in this space for single family and for townhomes. But there's a minority of cities that require a larger external and a larger covered structure for townhomes. So this would say this standard would apply to single family and to townhomes. Whereas right now, the discussion is really focused on single family, again, trying to drive toward the smaller single family unit. Okay, we're up to 125. I'll leave it open for another 20 seconds or so. Okay, we're up to 130, 140, which is awesome. Okay. Now this says, okay, look, we need to treat single family and townhomes differently because townhomes, you have more units on the spot, higher density area. And so we need more, or that's going to put more pressure on the street frontage for street parking. And so this would, this would increase the parking stall size for the driveway for the townhome from 9 by 18 to 9 by 20. So this would basically, the concept here is the townhome parking requirement would be slightly bigger than the single family parking requirement. Okay, that's the concept trying to get here is the first one was, should single family and townhomes be the same? For this one is, should townhomes be a little bigger? So I'll leave this open for. Okay, I'll leave this open for 10 more seconds. Okay. We've done 58. So let me pause there. Those are the moving pieces right now in the housing, land use, zoning spaces. I showed you a slide earlier of like all the things we've fought off to date. Jared referenced some of them, like requiring surety bonds, or as mentioned, Mayor Walker helping fight off 88 and House Bill 90 last week. There are still a bunch of bad bills that are still out there. You just haven't seen the language because we're trying to kill them quietly. But right now, this is the universe for the housing and land use spaces. We think our staff recommended positions are consistent with what you've told us via Slido and via other data over the last few months, which is why we're working in that space and holding the line at other areas such as required parking minimums. Are there any other questions or concerns with the staff recommendation of working towards support on those housing and land use bills? Okay. Well, Mayor Walker has been my shadow for the last few days and has been in a lot of these meetings with me. And so that's why we wanted, before these substitutes are coming out, make sure we're all on the same page about where we're going and where we're holding the line on those other pieces. So thank you for the time on the deep dive on the housing land use bills. Justin told us we need to be done by 12:45. That was a whoops, but we can hit the rest. Forward march.
Luckily, it's actually an honor to be this high on the agenda. So first, thank you for having me. I want to run through a few bills just for context. We're going to talk data. We don't have time to really talk data. So in the email tonight, I have a spreadsheet that I'm going to send out that goes through some of these concepts. What really we need to be working on now with legislation is what I'm going to kind of call like the supplemental sheltering. So that's Code Blue, Code Red, and Winter Response. They're kind of changing in ways that will collectively have impacts on cities. And so I just want to make sure that they're all going to be in separate pieces of legislation, but we need to be thinking of kind of how they're all going to interplay with one another. We've talked about Representative Clancy's bill for the last 2 weeks. What I really want to focus on is, again, as the bill stands right now, it dramatically changes winter response plans. It still requires winter response plans and actually removes the sunset that would only have required them this upcoming winter, but it takes out most of the land use, it takes out all of the land use preemption, takes out a lot of kind of the stick that went along with winter response. So now counties of the first and second class are required to have a task force and submit possible locations and their kind of assessed need for winter shelter to the Utah Homeless Services Board. So that is a pretty dramatic scale back for what winter response plans look like. Right now, there are no big provisions impacting Code Blue. Code Blue, and I'll hop ahead. So this is what I'm talking about. So winter response is that time-bound policy that runs from October 1st through April 15th. Code Blue is similar but different, and that is what is triggered at 18 degrees Fahrenheit in code right now. There are not a lot of proposed changes to Code Blue that would substantively impact what it looks like. What we are actively negotiating right now is Code Red, and that is what do we do when it is dangerously hot outside. Both the impetus for Code Blue and Code Red are essentially how do we prevent the loss of life? It is not necessarily optimizing care or anything restorative. It is how do we make sure that someone does not die because they are unsheltered. Code Red, as it is drafted right now, functions very similar to Code Blue. It applies to counties of the 1st through 4th class. Instead of a temperature, they are proposing a heat risk, which is a measure that NOAA uses, that essentially says a temperature isn't necessarily a strong indicator always of how dangerous it is to be outside. There are other factors that need to be considered, like humidity and other things. And so essentially what the bill says now is when there is a moderate heat risk in the county, as determined by NOAA and Health and Human Services, a Code Red goes into effect. The provisions are very similar to Code Blue. So for municipalities, it does not have any sort of affirmative thing that a city needs to be doing beyond outreach, which is to say what that would likely look like in practice is if your PD is out and they see someone unsheltered, if you could have a bottle of water for them and tell them someplace they can go, that is kind of the expectation. It also, the biggest thing that I would say impacts cities is that it doesn't, again, require that affirmative duty to do something, but it also says that you can't stop someone from providing that service within your municipality. So if a church says, we want to open up for day programming while it's dangerously hot out, as long as they are not violating fire code, even if it isn't what the intended building use is, you cannot say no. So that is what we're looking at right now. I'm still anticipating some changes to the bill. There are other levels of heat risk that we could be looking at. So I'm still talking about this. If you have other issues, questions, comments, concerns, let me know. But this is just kind of trying to lay out what the days and impacts look like for your communities so you can be informed as best as we can as to what this impact might be in your community. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'm going to get off the stage. Great. Thanks.
Okay, billboards. We talked about this last week. We've had a couple meetings since then. Our recommendation that you ratified was opposed as drafted, but we're expecting possibility of a sub. This morning, we had our billboard work group meeting. It's the second time that group has met. As a reminder, HB 198 talks about relocating a billboard because of reconstruction of an interstate or a state highway and removing the 1 mile for freeways or half mile for state highways. Quick context here, when a billboard gets relocated, there are other provisions that apply. So you cannot relocate a billboard within 500 feet of anything listed A through G, and it cannot be relocated into residential areas. There are actually, this is an important distinction that came out of our meeting this morning that I want to emphasize. There's relocation within LUDMA, within Title 10, that is like a circular radius of how a billboard can move anywhere within your city within a mile radius. This bill does not impact that law. This bill is focused on the linear relocation along the freeway or highway and the trigger is when there's reconstruction or new construction of that highway or freeway. Okay, so two separate relocation provisions. This one is only dealing with the trigger of I-15 being expanded, for example. Okay. So the work group met this morning, we walked through a variety of different options and they gave some suggestions that we're going to survey you now in Slido. So last week we asked you a list of like 8 things, which was super helpful because then we narrowed it down to like 3. We took that back to the industry and went back and forth, checked in with the billboard group this morning. And now we want to take the broader temperature because this bill will likely move this week. And this was one of the points that came out of our work group meeting this morning. So first, how do you feel about removing the 1 mile proximity requirement for billboard relocation? Yeah, question. So stop answering Slido until I answer the question. Yeah.
Don't have any billboards
Right.
and have never allowed them. But in this, it talks about it can move within a mile, but it says it may have an agreement to move it to a city,
Right.
but it doesn't say it has to.
Correct. Yes.
So we can still prohibit the billboards.
As of now, that the bill says what you just said.
Okay.
Okay, so if a city does not allow the billboard, you're not required to, but you can contract with another city to relocate a billboard from that city to your city. But that's a may, not a shall. Okay, but yeah, good clarification there. So this was one of the concepts that came out of this morning's meeting that we want to take the broader temperature from. We had about 15 cities on the call this morning. So how do you feel about removing the mile proximity requirement for billboard relocation due to interstate reconstruction, but restricting the relocation to the same city and along the same interstate? So the 1 mile goes away, but same city, same interstate. So if you have 5 miles of frontage, then it could go anywhere along that same interstate within that 5 miles of frontage, subject to those other restrictions I highlighted of the 500 feet from schools or from existing billboards or interchanges. Okay. So I'll leave this open. But this was one of the concepts we discussed in detail this morning with the work group. We wanted to take a broader temperature before we went back to the industry. So I'll leave this open for another 20 seconds or so. Okay, I'm leave it open for 10 more seconds. Okay, this question is similar, but with a key nuance difference. This question would change the 1 mile proximity to a higher number, but not anywhere along your frontage. But still, we're talking about the same interstate. Okay, so anywhere kind of in a linear way along your frontage, but it would be 3 miles in either direction instead of 1 mile. So more flexibility. Now, again, the problem they're trying to solve is the looming I-15 reconstruction in South Davis County, Northern Salt Lake County, because there'll be a bunch of billboards that'll be impacted by that expansion of I-15. And because of new interchanges and some of those other requirements, they're concerned about not having enough places to be able to relocate within the mile. And if they can't relocate within the mile, then that triggers the possibility of condemnation and purchasing of the sign. And so they would like more flexibility to relocate the sign before being pushed into purchasing the sign. It also leads to the question of who purchases the sign. Does UDOT purchase the sign, or does the city purchase the sign? And without the radius, the city purchases the sign. With the radius, the city purchases the sign within the radius. Okay. So again, similar question as before, but now with kind of a cap, just a broader cap. I'm trying to see if there's a difference in those concepts. And then I'll also note that the work group this morning raised several concerns they have about billboard relocation in other parts of the code that they wanted us to bring forward as part of the discussions too, but we just don't have time to go into those today. Mayor. Go ahead, Mayor.
So this doesn't change the cap of billboards that can be authorized for a city, correct? So
That is correct.
working
This
with the
is,
same number, just different
that's
locations.
correct. That's correct. Their intent is not to increase the number of billboards. It's to increase the flexibility to relocate.
Okay. Is it?
No, it's not. And one of the concerns that came up in the work group this morning was you could have a scenario where, I just have to use my hands here. I-15, you have a sign here. I-15's here. I-15 reconstruction pushes out to here. And that billboard is now would now be under the road, right? But conceivably, billboard could be relocated, or not relocated, could be rebuilt just a little further inland on the same property. And one of the concerns was if you lose this billboard because of the reconstruction and they relocate here, but then another billboard could come here and you have resulted in the net increase. So that was one of the nuances that came up this morning. So what we're trying to do is just take the temperature broadly of these concepts, and then we can work through the nuances. And let's, Dave. And then I'll note, we've emphasized the word interstate here because that's the most pressing issue. The language in the bill contemplates changing these for interstates and highways.
David Larson, South Weber City. Has there been any conversation about the idea of relocating in the closest available location and not creating these broader
Yeah.
flexibility areas, 1 mile to 3 mile, just say the nearest available location based on the other requirements?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And that was part of the discussion this morning is you can go here, but you prefer to go over there because it's a more ideal spot. Well, we shouldn't be obligated to do that as part of relocation if this site still works. And so we talked this morning about maybe having some sort of prioritization where if you can stay on the property, even if you just have to move inland a little bit, then that's step one. And then if you really can't use that property anymore, then looking to relocation. But I mean, you raised an excellent point there too. So any other questions on that topic? We expect that bill to be in committee later this week, so stay tuned. And we'll be taking your Slido results, going through them and preparing to meet with the industry tomorrow. Okay, municipal broadband, this we talked about last week, opposes drafted because of the requirement to have voter approval for the revenue bond, which would be the first of its kind voter approval in statute. You told us last week that 71% of you were very concerned about that precedent. Another 16% were somewhat concerned. So we've taken that back and we raised this with a few of the municipal broadband cities and with the city managers last week about, do you have an enhanced notice requirement? And so if Cameron City wants to create and finance a municipal fiber system, there'd be additional noticing and hearing requirements related to that revenue bond and that city action, similar to what we did a few years ago with utility fund transfers, where if Cameron City wants to transfer money from a power department to the city, there's enhanced notice requirements. Right now, I'd say the industry is up in the air on this one. They're going to take that back to their folks. But this was a concept that came from discussions with city managers and a few others that we wanted to take the temperature of broadly to know, is this worth pursuing or not? Okay, so I'll leave this question up for another moment and then turn it to Justin here to walk through elections. And we've got Slido on elections. And then the good news is we've hit some of the bottom issues already. So actually, all things considered, we're doing okay.
The one thing I will note on this one, on this enhanced notice piece is, like Cam said, they're up in the air on this one. And this is also a bill that has already gone through in committee, is on the Senate floor. It's on the board there. So if this doesn't go anywhere, if the advance notice isn't something they want to take, then be watching for an action alert, because this is one where we could say it's up for a vote and we need to fight back on this one. So if we don't see any movement on this kind of proposal, we may be in a floor fight. So don't hesitate. If we, as a reminder, or if you're new, if we send out the action alert, that means we need you to act immediately. Reach out to your senator and tell them we oppose the bill and here's the reasons why. And we'll give you the reasons why. You don't have to make them up. But watch for those emails. If it says action alert, we need action then. All right, we'll move on. Oh, actually, rev and tax, Cam. It's still you. Still you. You tried.
All right, this actually should be pretty quick. We have updates on a few of the key revenue bills. We showed this to you before about the difference between a tax and a fee and why it matters to preserve our fee authority. Mayor Walker, can I put you on the spot to just give a quick summary of our conversation with Representative Peterson? You don't need to name the names of the other stakeholders, but kind of some of the ideas that came forward in our meeting 2 hours ago.
Yes. Really, the gist of it is that if you've done your study, die again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the exceptions, or at least new language in this, is if you were hoping to implement a public safety fee, you would not be able to do that going forward. You'd have to be a city that already had one. You'd have to be a city that already had a public safety fee on the books, and then you would have to every 3 years renew your public safety fee. Your council members would have to vote. Your council members would have to vote to renew that public safety fee. So it really doesn't affect very many cities. I think only one actually. And you'd only be able to do
about a half dozen.
You'd only be able to do it if you have a contract for public safety. With respect to the transportation fee, what we talked about there was going forward and imposing the transportation impact fee, but creating an exemption, or not an exemption, but creating as part of your study, you would have to look at the use with respect to like houses of worship. So you could take your typical ward house as an example on the street. And instead of just basing it directly on the ownership, it would be the use criteria that you would have in your study. For example, if you meet there less than 3 times a week. I thought it was a good way to limit a lot of church time, but that was me. But might be a benefit, might not. But we think that as you look at that transportation utility fee and if it's soundly based on the use, we think it's a valid fight for us to have, because the argument is essentially Rice Eccles pays the fee. So should the team down south stadium pay the fee. Is that right, Cameron?
Yep, there
I
you go.
mean, we're both Utah fans,
Yeah,
but
that's right.
that's the gist of it.
Can you also mention when Representative Peterson got us together to say, where is everybody? And we said, we're going to bring it back to LPC. Without naming names, can you just say what those other groups wanted in addition to what's in the bill now?
Yeah, one of the groups, I shouldn't name them, you're right, wanted to wholesale change the tax relationship that we have with the state legislature, like rewrite the entire balance, which we told them that's not something we're going to do. But Representative Peterson's willing to go up the hill for us on this. And so she wants to know if we're with her. So essentially, if you're looking at imposing a transportation utility fee, this bill's compromise would be one that makes sense based on the use. And it doesn't wholesale change any of the way we raise our taxes or deal with general property tax or sales tax initiatives. So is that where you want it, Cameron?
Yeah, that's great. I'll just add a couple other details here. As we were meeting with those other stakeholder groups this morning, one, they said they wanted more fees to be restricted. And we said, absolutely not. They said, well, we want you to have to go to the legislature to ask permission to do fees. And we said, absolutely not. And they said, we want a truth and taxation process for these fees. We said, absolutely not. And then they said, well, we don't want any carve outs for anything in the public safety fee space. And we said, absolutely not, because of the existing things that have taken place before. And Representative Peterson stood up for us on all of those points. And then she's trying to figure out, is there a way to split the difference between the pushback that we're inevitably going to get from entities that don't want to pay the fee, and still making sure that the fee is difficult but doable and consistent with our prior objectives here. So our recommendation is, now that this bill is out, and again, these are the primary differences between 367 last year, which we endorsed, and now, is that we support this bill and we put some muscle behind it to support her, recognizing there are going to be some political battles with the Senate, because the Senate preference of this bill is more truth and taxation type approach and exempting certain entities from paying user fees. So don't know where that's going to shake out, but for now, our recommendation is to support this and support her.
One other item in that vein is that the courts have soundly held these to be fees and not a tax subject to truth and taxation. And so our goal is to keep it in the fee realm, because we have legal authority to have it there as a fee. The opposition is going to want to try and create it into a tax and then require, at that point, there's no point in having the fee. You just have your tax. So that's the key element to keep in mind as we move forward with it. It's a legal fee. Cities are charging it, and it makes sense to me as your league president. And so I think that's kind of where we are.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions about this? People comfortable with this approach? Roger, Megan?
At the end of the day, we could walk out of this with nothing.
Which is fine, right?
Fine.
Yeah, this was last year too. Policy-wise, we don't need a bill. Politically, this fight will continue year after year after year. And we have a bill sponsor who's already gone to the mat for us last year and is willing to go to the mat for us again with these changes, which is why our recommendation is to support the new version of the bill, because she's been a champion for us. Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right, House Bill 456, transit room tax amendments. Last week, we told you a bill was coming. It came out over the weekend. We told you the purpose of this bill was not to get additional revenue to every city in town in the state, but that our objective from a league perspective was to ensure that cities and towns that have a lot of high impact from tourism were included in the bill. This is what the first version looks like. The state TRT would increase by 1%. So that 0.32 is the status quo. 50% would go to the state general fund, 25% for search and rescue grants in rural Utah, and then 25% to the county of origin for tourism impacts. That pool is about $7 million. The counties would get some flexibility with their existing TRT. Well, I want to emphasize that the current version of the bill does not contemplate any changes to the percentage of money that's spent on promotion versus non-promotion. Instead, the flexibility comes with providing a few more uses for those non-promotion dollars. So it's not everything that the counties have sought of additional flexibility on the promotion side, but a little more flexibility on the non-promotion TRT side. And then the city participation is it calls out that an allowable use of those county TRT funds is to contract with cities, and it would require high impact cities, and that's our definition, to get seats on the county tourism advisory boards around the state. Because that's one of the frustrations we've heard from cities forever, is that the counties collect a lot of tourism money and the cities aren't at the table when those dollars are being discussed at the advisory board, which then recommends it to the county council or commission for spending. So our recommendation right now is to stay position pending, because we want to continue the conversation of trying to get more money directly to the high impact cities. And at this point, we've tried several different ways in these conversations. At this point, we're focusing on A3 and A4 to either expand that definition of the rural search and rescue grants to include those high impact cities and towns, or include those high impact cities and towns in a subsection 4. But for the majority of cities and towns, you would not be part of 1A. For some cities and towns, you would see a benefit from 2 and 3 because the county would have more flexibility to contract with you. And those of you who generate a lot of TRT in your city would have seats on the board. Councilman Ravi?
It's prohibited from municipalities to be on county TRT boards.
No, it's silent. So right now, well, actually, that's not true. So right now in state law, the county is required to have a majority of those tourism advisory boards come from industries that collect and remit the tax. And then the remainder is made up of county appointees, but it's spelled out. These are the types of folks we want there, i.e. convention centers or other folks that way. So what the bill now does is it reduces the number of county folks and replaces them with up to 3 city folks, depending on the impact your city has. So I'll use Washington County as an example. In Washington County, 35% of the county TRT, based on our data, is generated in St. George, and another 20% is generated in Springdale. So those two, 35 plus 20, 55%, under the current bill, St. George and Springdale would be statutorily entitled to seats on that board that their city council can appoint. So the county number goes down, the city number goes up, those two would both be on, and then there'd be a third city from Washington County. And that city honestly depends on the year of the data you look at of who number 3 would be.
Could be Washington State.
Okay, so Washington up front, Washington in the back.
Jordan Hess, Washington City. Has UAC weighed in on this bill yet?
Yes, they've been involved in all the negotiations. Their policy meeting is on Thursday. The bill came out Friday or Saturday. So I don't think they've weighed in on the bill as drafted, but they've been involved in these negotiations from the get-go. Okay. The two up front, and then Justin, I think it comes back to you. Or no, I think I still have property tax.
Has the state described what they're planning to use that general fund portion? Is it for tourism, or is it just whatever they would like it to be used for? Eric Ellis, Vineyard City.
Yeah, no, I know, Eric. I thought I heard. Yeah, okay. That was Mark. I'm not going to repeat it. But I always have Mark's voice in the back of my head, for better or for worse. So Eric's question is a good one of how will the state use that additional general fund money? And I'd say right now it's up in the air. There's been discussion of ensuring there's a nexus to tourism mitigation in some form or fashion, but there's discussion between the House and the Senate of what should that money be used for. So stay tuned. Okay. All right. Roger, you've been around property tax in this state for a long time. There was a meeting last week after LPC that Roger and Mayor Walker and Justin attended. Is there anything you want to kind of describe to set up this Slido question? This is session number 47 for you now?
It is.
Yeah, that's why I won't
Bringing
let,
that up.
that's why I won't let him retire. But Roger, I'll let you give the history lesson here briefly.
Okay, most of you know there's a 45% exemption on fair market value from residential property. It has been there since 1983. It was originally parked at 25%, but it had a headroom of 45. It went to 45 in about 15 years. Their legislature is constantly struggling. This is not a new gig of inflation going up on homes and people trying to figure out what to do. I've seen it happen at least 5 or 6 times, and this is actually not the worst in percentage terms. So there's always, what do we do to protect homeowners from property tax increases? And so they latch onto the tool of raising the residential exemption more. Now, bear in mind, raising the residential exemption doesn't cost us money, but it shifts who pays. So it means homes pay less. That means other property pays more. So that's what's involved in the shift. The question is, residential property is well over half of the entire property tax base in the state at this point. I don't think it does much to raise it to 45. I will say, if it were my druthers, the whole thing would be dropped down back to 25. But that's not going to happen politically. But this is the tool everybody latches onto each time. It's a constitutional amendment. And that's the discussion that 2 representatives, and they're trying very hard. Justin was in the meeting with me. I mean, this is not a case of they're struggling to deal with a public outcry over property tax. And this sort of is like the only tool that they can see. And so that's the proposal. Bear in mind, we're a minority user of the property tax. When I say that, well over half of the property tax comes from schools. Then you've got about 20% for the counties, then cities are about 16, and then special districts another amount. But we tend to oftentimes be the point of the spear in this debate because the residences are in our cities for the most part. The counties take heat because they administer the property tax. And for some reason, the schools escape the discussion. And bear in mind, the primary part of it was the values that went up, but the real driver of property tax increases the last 3 years was the state legislature, who basically took the state minimum school levy and didn't go through truth and taxation. They let it stay. It didn't float down. So there was a big property tax increase as a result of that. But that's what this proposal is about. They always talk about it. Businesses will go crazy. I don't see it happening, but it's always there. And I've seen it always there now for 40 plus years. Is that fair summary? You were in the meeting.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Roger. So yeah, just take a second. How do you feel about the proposal to raise the residential exemption for property tax from 45 to 55%? Now, that is the constitutional amendment, which would take it to 55%. There is an accompanying bill that would raise it statutorily to 50%, but the constitutional amendment would raise it up to 55. So give you one more second to answer this one, because we are over time, as we often are, but we're going to run through a couple more things anyway. Good job. Elections. All right. HB 300, there are many, many election bills out there. But we wanted to make sure that HB 300, this is the one that passed out of committee last week. I want to make sure everyone is clear as to what this particular bill does in its current form, and then ask you a question about that. So one, this is a bill that say ballots will be mailed to voters. So we're still mailing ballots to voters. It's not completely getting rid of vote by mail. Ballots are mailed to voters, but ballots must be returned in person, showing voter ID, either at the drop box or at a polling location. Right now, there's fairly limited hours on what those drop box hours would be. There's not going to have people standing there 24/7 like you have a drop box availability right now. But that is what the bill does in essence, is we mail a ballot to everybody, and then you go return it in person, showing ID. You can just hit your button there, Mike. It'll probably work better.
Mike Winder, City Manager, Mill Creek. Have they said anything about how this affects overseas military personnel, missionaries, or others?
Doesn't. So under state and federal law, An overseas or military voter is not affected by this. There's other laws that govern what that looks like. So there's already a requirement in law that 45 days before an election, military and overseas voters have to be mailed or sent a ballot that they can still return. So it would not impact those voters at all. Good question. So there is a substitute language expected here. We don't know what the timelines look like. We don't know what the subs look like. One of the proposals that is out there that has been floated by several different groups is that instead of limiting having to take it back and show ID, we could put the last 4 digits of someone's driver's license. So you sign your ballot or the ballot envelope, and then you put the last 4 of your driver license, which gives them a second piece of data that they can verify when they're verifying that it is in fact your ballot that they're getting back. So that's one of the things that's out there. Bring it up because it'll be on the questions. But Lynn, you had a question or comment?
I haven't been involved in this. Sorry, Lynn. I haven't been involved in this dialogue at all, but if they're going this direction, one of the challenges would be access to drop-off points and backups. Has there been any consideration given to increasing the number of drop-off places, for instance, at any city recorder?
So that is, yeah, it's been discussed. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing that says this is how many you have to have or what it looks like, but there's no question you would need longer hours. Well, let me say it this way. You would either need longer hours in more locations, or you just have to expect very, very long lines. Paul.
Are there just a flood of demonstrated voter fraud cases involving mail-in ballots that's driving this? Or is it just a political statement of someone? I think I knew the answer to that. Thank you.
Not even answering it. All right. So because we're running short on time here. Yeah. We got a few questions online. Great. Let's take them online. But as we're doing that, you can look at this question and start answering. But what are our questions online?
Okay, questions online include how would the vote bill handle voters who are hospitalized?
Great question.
Start there and then I'll hit the others.
Sure. So hospitalized voters, there's already things in statute that deal with someone who is in an emergency situation. This bill wouldn't change that. Someone in an emergency situation could still have a ballot brought to them, filled out, and taken back. There's provisions in law that have dealt with it long before we're doing vote by mail, and those stay in place.
Right. Okay. Second,
so what about the impacts on the elderly? There is not a break in the code that says if you're over a certain age, you can mail your ballot back. So
exactly
nothing specific there.
Yeah, other than just an indirect impact, right?
There's an indirect impact. Yeah.
About the fiscal note on cities, and then how those verifying IDs should be trained, and who's responsible for paying for the additional poll workers.
So fiscal impact on cities, yeah, this is one of the big things that we brought up in committee. In essence, you're running 2 elections now. You're running a vote by mail election because you're mailing ballots to every voter. And then you're running an in-person election because you have to have polling places that are staffed with additional poll workers. So no question, this would cost everybody more to run their elections. And even those that are pushing the bill have acknowledged that that is something they need to look at and figure out funding around. The big concern I have from experience is they kind of forget about municipal elections sometimes up here, and they tend to fund outreach for the other elections, but trying to get funding for outreach during municipal year has been a beast historically.
Talk about the opt-in for the vote by mail.
Opt-in, so there's, different discussions out there about still allowing an opt-in for vote by mail, but it wouldn't be just for anyone. You'd have to have some kind of excuse. So a lot of states have what's called excuse absentee voting. Utah is currently a no excuse absentee state. If you had reasons, medical reasons, traveling, other things, then there are provisions that would be looked at for absentee there. But under the current proposals, and depending which bill, there's a lot of bills out there, you wouldn't not just anybody would necessarily be able to get a vote by mail ballot.
What if you go to the clerk each year for opt-in?
What if you go to the clerk each year for the opt-in? Potentially. There are bills out there that say every year you have to show up to the clerk and say, yes, I'm opting in and I want the ballot. So there are proposals out there, but that's not this bill specifically.
Ken Shelton, West Jordan City. The third option, including last 4 digits of driver's license number, could that also be like a state ID for a driving privilege card?
Potentially. This isn't anything in a bill. This is just something that's been out there. So yeah, the idea of a last 4 of your driver license or a state ID, that is a potential, yes, that's being proposed.
Got a question that I just.
Oh, question you just handed to me. That's exciting. Okay, so right now, yeah, so bill allows anyone to opt in as long as they go to the clerk each year. So that's in the current bill. Here's the thing, the current bill is going to change a lot. So we're asking about some of these concepts, not necessarily every concept, and we're not taking a position on the bill yet because we expect it to change. So I want to be really clear that we're not asking you to take a position on this bill. We're just asking for comfort level on some of these concepts. Okay? Yep.
Teddy Hodges, Harriman. So if we look back at what problem we solved at the beginning with mail ballots, are we circumventing that, trying to take them away? And I think voter turnout's going to be much less already as a 20-30% turnout on a lot of these non-general election, like national elections.
Yeah, that's right. So for a municipal election, there is a demonstrable increase in turnout with vote by mail. For a presidential election, not necessarily a turnout you can attribute to vote by mail for those big elections. However, smaller elections, municipal primary elections, even primary elections during a general election year, no question that vote by mail has been shown to increase turnout. The other piece I will add, organically over the years, counties and cities decided to go to vote by mail. It wasn't something that was mandated upon everybody. One of the things that took some of the counties to go into vote by mail was it's getting harder and harder to find poll workers. So when we say we're going to go back to having a place where you drop them off on election day, one of the things the counties looked at and said, you know, it's getting harder and harder to get poll workers. It'll be easier to do this for vote by mail. So some of the reasons we decided to go vote by mail, yeah, this would make it harder to deal with those.
Tom DeSirant, Mill Creek. I think that the poll workers situation is actually the worst part about this. This requires a ballot drop box for every 10,000 voters, and then, or sorry, 2 drop boxes for every 10,000 voters, and then an additional drop box for every additional 10,000 voters in a municipality, not even county, just per city. Then it requires 2 people to be staffing each one of those drop boxes for a 12-hour period for at least 6 days, if not more. And I just don't think that we're going to be able to find the staff to be able to manage that.
Okay. So again, Slido question. We are not taking position on this bill. I know you really want to, and guess what? I don't care because it's going to change. Love you, but it's not happening. We are going to get your feedback on this, and a ton of you have already answered it. But if you haven't, give us your feedback on this. There is going to be other versions of this bill. But here's what I will say. If you don't want some situation where you've got to staff polling places on election day, if you think that we should not be putting those back in person, tell your legislator, okay? You got their number. Reach out and say, I've got concerns with the direction this bill is going, and here is the impact it will have on my city. Here's what it could look like to my costs. Here's what I think it could do to my turnout. So reach out to your representatives. It's not in the Senate yet. So you can tell your senator, but they'll forget because it's not on their board. But reach out to your representatives and say, here are the concerns I have with the bill. Awesome to tell me, appreciate it. Better to tell them. One final bill, I think. This is SB 154, a companion bill, SJR 4. This SB 154, legislative audit amendments, basically it says attorney-client privilege materials can be accessed by the legislative auditor's office if they're conducting an audit. So my take on this is we're going to be opposed to it.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure anyone doesn't have a thought otherwise. Okay, that's what I thought. We're opposed to this bill. We're planning on being opposed to this bill. We expect there should also be a substitute, at least on SB 154. We do not expect that will change our opinion, but just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of this bill. If it moves forward in any way, shape, or form, you can expect an action alert on this one as well. And with that, oh, we have one more. So close, Kate.
All right, I'll be very quick on this one. So Senate Bill 195, this is the Omnibus Transportation Bill. There's a whole lot more in this bill, but really the piece that we cared about when it first came out was this provision in here that's, you can see the stricken out language. It would have required every city in a county of the first through third class to inventory the canals in their city and where a local road dead ends. You'd have to create a plan and then begin implementation by 2029. If a city did not make substantial progress, they could have Class C road funds withheld. We agreed this was a non-starter. This was concerning to our folks, to you. I don't see, I thought I heard Andrew Gruber earlier, but I don't see him. So WFRC, MAG, UDOT, we met with a couple city people. We had a little work group that we requested volunteers for at LPC last meeting. We sat down, discussed some possible alternatives, which brings us to today. And I want to give a huge shout out to the MPOs. WFRC, MAG spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. So thank you to them for their frantic work. So what the bill now says is by July 2027, so you have some runway, cities within an MPO boundary, so narrower box, must update their transportation and circulation elements of their general plans to identify priority connections to remedy physical impediments, including water conveyances or canals. But you could look at it more holistically if you want. You have the option to that enhance vehicle circulation, transit, bicycle, pedestrian access to significant priority destinations. So, and for each of those that the city identifies, so you have the option. You have to provide cost estimates, potential funding sources, so where you have options, and then impediments to those connections. So if you say, we have this canal that we'd really like to connect a road over, you can identify that as a priority in your general plans, and then you can, this doesn't have to be a robust engineering study, but just try to estimate what that cost is, figure out maybe we don't have enough revenue, that could be an impediment. If there's other issues with getting easements, that could be an impediment as well. So just collect all that information and put that in your general plan. So I forwarded this, the substitute's now publicly available. I sent this to the work group. We're recommending a position of support on this language since it is now gone from the preemption space to the partnership space. Now it's a planning approach. And we also are hopeful that this can help funnel up information to the legislature about challenges cities have to funding these kind of connections and hopefully get some future funding resources available for transportation connectivity. So that's the quick update on this. We think it's in a much better place. Huge shout out to everybody who's been on the work groups and the emails and all the additional effort. So are there any questions on this? I know it's a shotgun. Okay, since we're out of time, I'll turn it over to Kate to wrap us up.
I hope everybody memorized all of those positions. Are we ready to ratify our bill tracker with the positions discussed and presented? All right, we have a motion from Mayor Tran and a second from Mayor Burton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Looks like we've got a unanimous tracker. Do not forget, next week is President's Day. And we will not be meeting here on Monday, but you can come hang out if you have nothing else to do. We will be meeting on Tuesday.